gotta, the one was a share corn.
Appreciate it, Darren.
Hey, how you doing? Good.
6 o'clock. Let's call this meeting to order at 1800 hours. Joint meeting between the Warren County 911 Service Board and the Warren County Board of Supervisors. Doug, can we do roll call for the 911 board?
Carlisle. Here. Des Moines.
Here.
Hartford. Indianola. Here. Jackson Township.
Here.
Lacona. Martinsdale.
Here.
Milo.
Here.
New Virginia.
Here.
Northern Warren. Norwalk.
Here.
Pleasantville.
Here.
Warren County.
Here.
Warren County Emergency Management.
Here.
Warren County Sheriff.
Here.
West Des Moines.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Board of Supervisors, do roll call.
McIntyre. Here. Peter.
Here.
So this meeting tonight is being brought forth to discuss basically operations of what 911 has done in the past for this communication system and moving forward where we're going to go with the sheriff doing personnel and having stuff and the 911 board. Doug's going to go over what the 911 board has done in the past, and then we will move forward on that.
Okay. The 911 board was formed in 1986. At that time, in Warren County, the 911 board basically took on all of the equipment side of the dispatch center, and the sheriff took care of the personnel. So since that time, I've been here 15 years. We have bought new radio equipment. We remodeled, got new dispatch consoles in 2004, the new CAD system in 2004, and then we did a tower project in 2007 through 2008 where we put radio equipment at several communities on the radio tower trying to better the system. And we were still having communications issues. So we took on the project. We hired a consultant to look at the needs assessment. They came back with a proposal. The 911 board did not have the funding avenue to pursue the cost of that. So we passed it on to, discussed it with emergency management. At that time, emergency management didn't take it on. They wanted it to go to the Board of Supervisors. We took that project onto the Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors did the essential service bond to not only pay for the consoles, but pay for the communication system in general. We had been going to RFP to compare the two different systems in the state, but at that time we also had the courthouse issue that came up, and that came along faster than our RFP did, and we were asked to vacate that building within 3 months. And the only way we could do that was, our existing equipment was Motorola, and it kind of pushed us that direction to do a sole source project with Motorola and joining the ISIC system at that time. That was 2018. Historically, like I say, the 911 board has taken care of everything back room. That was everything out at the towers, everything, the antennas, the circuits, the lines, and the sheriff was just over the policies and personnel. With this project, Warren County took ownership of the $11 million communication system, so it kind of fell underneath the Board of Supervisors. Between myself and Don Bowman, we were tasked with working on that project, getting it through to finish. And since then, we've had some new operations, new ideas, and we're just working on where we move forward.
First off, Communication Center legal, things to consider. Doug, would you like to speak on that?
Those of you who don't know me, my name is Doug Eichels, I'm the county attorney. So what prompted this is several questions regarding who is responsible for payment on what, who owns each different parts of the system, who has responsibility for maintenance of the system, all those types of questions. So that prompted me to ask questions because people that know me know that I don't like to leave things undone, okay? And I want to know the answers before the problems occur. And really, if you really want to get down to it even more, I want things in writing so that if somebody from the public comes up to me, you, anybody else and says, okay, we paid 10 point something million dollars for towers and radios, who owns those? Okay. So my ultimate goal would be that a master document comes out of all this and says, who's responsible for the towers? Who owns them? There is an unsigned resolution that was proposed back in April regarding that. It's never been resolved about Warren County owning the tower system itself and the length on that, namely being the 20-year term of the bond that's out there right now. Okay, so that's an unsolved or an unresolved issue for me. I want to see something finally solved on that. Who owns all the equipment in dispatch? Who's responsible for the maintenance of it? Who's going to set it up at the new place? Who gets a say on how it's set up? Personnel, I mean, I think that's pretty clear that those fall under the sheriff's office, but I think a master document that kind of spells all that out resolves some of those things down the road. Because I know people have concerns about, okay, it's at the sheriff's office now with the sheriff. What happens if a new sheriff comes in 3 years or down the road sometime and that sheriff has a different mindset? If you have a master document that writes it down, that where it's written down, harder to go back and say it's something else for that person down the road. Harder for them to say, well, I didn't understand how all these pieces fit together. So that's why I raised the question, okay? And I know people out there say, why is the county attorney involved? And I hear your statements, they get back to me. That's why I'm involved, okay? For no other reason other than that. I think that a good way to go forward also would be some sort of flow chart that shows simply for the public how everything fits together. You know, you're going to have the communications system itself, obviously the sheriff, 911 board fit in there, the towers through the board of supervisors fit in over here. So I don't expect that everything's going to get resolved in one meeting. Okay, that's not what it's about, but it's about having a discussion. I hope that through this discussion, this isn't about personalities. It's not about somebody being in control. It's about everybody having a discussion, talk about it calmly, about where they want to be with this whole system. Okay, so that's the goal. Okay, and I'm not here to tell you what I think, because frankly, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters how this system works for you. You're the people that have to use it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, all my office is going to do is say whether the plan that you come up with meets the code. Bottom line. okay? If it meets the code, if everybody's doing it correctly, I don't need to have a say on how it goes. That's not my purpose. My purpose is just to make sure that everything's done correctly, that it's in writing. I don't want to get down the road where, some tower falls over for some reason. We have derecho number 3, or a tornado falls over on somebody else's property, damages something else, and then we're scrambling and saying, well, who's responsible for that? Okay, let's just solve what we can solve now, and then we put all that to rest. Okay?
Perfect, thank you, sir.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Sheriff, would you like to come talk about the kind of structuring?
For the policies procedures?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Only brought, I wasn't expecting this big of a meeting, I got 15 copies. So anybody that wants one, I can definitely get you one later. Can everybody hear me from here, or do you want me to move in front, or?
Can you come up front?
Yeah.
Joe, or-
Yep. So we had a meeting, I think late January. I met with most of the fire chiefs, police chiefs were there, and we had a discussion on policies and how policies and procedures were going to come to be for personnel issues and comm center concerns. And one of the things that we discussed that I think was important to a lot of to all the fire chiefs and the police chiefs is that the users have a say in the policies and procedures of how dispatch is ran. That's what I've heard for several months now, that was one of the biggest concerns, is that it shouldn't be under one person. So what I've, in working with the chiefs, what we've come up with is essentially every policy or every procedure that is going to be implemented in dispatch will go through a committee, and that is a committee made up of the chiefs of law enforcement and fire and EMS and the sheriff. It's all the users or the administration of the users of our system. And the structure of that is going to be where you have the dispatch supervisor who is going to work with the dispatchers, is going to work with whoever he or she deems necessary to come up with the policies and procedures. It will then come to, from that point, it will then come to a subcommittee made up of, obviously, the committee itself, but the subcommittee is 5 members. The reason for 5 members is you can never have a tie vote, obviously, with an odd number. So a policy or procedure either passes or fails. The subcommittee is made up of the president and vice president of the Warren County Fire Association, the Carlisle Police Chief, the Indianola Police Chief, and the sheriff. The reason for that is working with the fire chiefs. I have no say in who Indianola or Carlisle employs their police chiefs. I have no say in who the fire chiefs elect as their president and vice president. So it's permanently those 5 members that would come together for the subcommittee. When a policy is brought to the subcommittee, obviously if that subcommittee of 5 people fail the policy, it can either be discarded completely if it has that much unrest with it, or it can maybe be rewritten a little bit if there's concerns brought up and things are tweaked or rewritten, and go to the subcommittee again and then be passed on to the committee. Once it passes the subcommittee and goes to the committee is made up of, like I said, every user of the system, or every chief of users of the system. So you got your Indianola Police Chief, your Carlisle Police Chief. That would include all the fire chiefs from everybody that is on our system. Not necessarily every jurisdiction in the county, but everybody that is on our system. Currently that sets at 12 people, or 12 agencies. Once a policy or procedure comes to that committee, it's either passed or failed by a simple majority. Also something, I understand too that there can be policies and procedures that come up that may affect the Board of Supervisors' budget or may affect E911's budget. So if there's a policy or procedure that comes up that has an effect on those budgets, I think that policy should go before the appropriate board that controls the financial means that policy would affect. and make sure that board is good with it before the committee can pass it and implement it as a policy or procedure. An example of that would be something like, we routinely replace equipment in the comm center. Like recently this year, we replaced the chairs for the dispatchers. That come to a total just over $5,000. So as a committee, we may say, hey, instead of having to bite off $5,000 every time we need all new chairs, let's just make it a habit of every year we're going to replace a chair, or every 2 years we're going to replace 2 chairs. Well, that's something that may affect an E911 budget. So that board needs to say, okay, hey, we're okay with budgeting for this. Before the committee says this is what we're doing, we want to make sure the financial instrument that's going to supply that or honor that policy or procedure is okay with it. Just one example. In going through everything and as much as you want to try to plan for every situation, you can't. We're never going to out policy or out procedure Murphy's Law. We're going to be, anybody that's done this more than twice knows things come up, and sometimes you just got to do what you got to do to get it done. I think the last page here of this procedure is where it says the sheriff reserves the right to deviate from a policy. What that is for is this. It doesn't mean that, well, it's Tuesday, we're doing this. What that means is when we get out in a situation and something's going on and our current policies and procedures are not bringing a safe and peaceful resolution, you have to have a rule in place to say, hey, we can do this, we need to do this. And that'd be working with anybody that's on scene, that the decision would be made, this is what we're going to do. After that, situation comes up, situation like that will go right back to the committee or subcommittee, and we could adjust or create another policy or procedure as needed to deal with that. But we're never going to be able to foresee everything that comes up, and you've got to have a way to take care of the situation right there on the spot. You can't wait till next week to have a committee meeting because it needs addressed right there. Like I said, I've got printouts that go into a little bit more detail than that, but that's the gist of it. Any questions or concerns, comments?
Can I get a copy of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question, Sheriff. How are the new users going to be represented on the subcommittee? Like currently there's Public Works, there's Utilities, and Warren County Health Services. They're not represented in the subcommittee.
So when they became users of the system, absolutely, then we would have to go back and kind of redraft how we wanted to have it on the subcommittee. I mean, as we add new users, which we will as we grow, that's something that the committee, we'd have to come up with a policy that says, hey, if we have a new user, this is the avenue of how they get on. And then you would get into, because if you have multiple cities that have municipalities that want on, that's where we'd have to figure out, okay, is it one municipality or are we letting a representative from each? That's something, or it could default to, depending on the city, is that something that defaults through their police chief or their fire chief? That's something I think that the committee would have to come up with because we are going to add new users as we go along. Absolutely. So, yeah.
Is it your thought that policies could work both ways? That it might be that larger group, that all users that say, hey, we need a policy about XYZ, or that it come from the other end, the dispatch supervisor saying, hey, we need a policy, we want to know what all these chiefs want, that it could work both ways, both up and down?
Yep, so I guess the way I would envision that would be, if as a committee we're sitting there, or somebody, maybe even one person on the committee says, hey, I think maybe we need to address this.
Yeah.
Currently, we'd give it to Tom and say, hey, we want a policy that addresses this. Or it could be something to where, I mean, I guess
So they all go back to.
So we revert back to the policy bureau, unless.
There's an idea.
Sure,
of
yep.
a perceived need, that they'd all start with the dispatch supervisor and work, that the system would work top down that way, the way you described
Yeah.
it, but that the starting point is always coming back to. Okay.
Yeah, but so I think the idea should be presented, and then that way, because that way you have it go through every phase. It's like an architect and a carpenter.
Yeah.
You can draw pretty drawings, but if there's no way to build it, and so that's why I think if you have every step involved, then you can say, hey guys, yeah, that's a good idea, but we need to do this or we need to do that because it's just not feasible for us to do that.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
so that's understood
Mhm.
that that's the process.
Yep.
Thanks.
Any other questions for the sheriff? Perfect, thank you. Crystal, would you like to present your view?
I want to talk real quick about PSAP, or 34A.
I think you'll do a fine job.
Okay.
Like,
There's
we'll-
been
like,
questions.
we'll help out, or I'll help out.
I don't think anybody from 911 really needs any help, but this kind of explains what 911 is really responsible for. Anything on this side of the tower. And anything from the tower over is going to be those individual jurisdictions.
There is a little
Paragraph.
clarification with that. So if you have mobile dispatch, so if you have an MDT, something that is connected back to your CAD, that's covered. Because that is how you're getting that CAD information. It's all about the data that comes out of dispatch, whether that's voice or computer. It's that information originated in dispatch and then is coming to you through to us as a responder. So whether that's coming to you over the radio to give you instructions, or it's coming to you over the computer.
So that's
And that
receipt
picture-
and
that-
disposition.
And that picture doesn't really address the computer part of it. If you look at it, it was written in
Nice to keep
2012.
them.
So that wasn't very prevalent in Warren County at the time.
Just so there's no question.
So when you're talking about who qualifies for funding to do that?
It is just what does receipt and disposition mean? Not whether it qualifies for funding or not, because 34A has a very specific paragraph that describes what can be paid. And Blake has a fair amount of say in what can and can't, and that's all laid out in 34A as well. So rather than, it's, like, you're like better gifted to explain this than I am. But it's laid out in 34A. There's a definition within 34A that says what a 911 service board funding can be used for. It's about that long, about an inch long of the 17 pages.
And there is a copy of 34A back there for everyone.
And it's in the definition section. That's what really lays out what 911 funds can be used for. The propensity of 34A is really given direction to Blake and Homeland Security on the disposition of the funds as they come in.
And a lot of that can be left up to the locals to decide, just because it can,
Correct.
the
Doesn't mean it
locals,
should.
yeah, the locals can decide if they do.
And really, the should is all about, the needs outweigh the funding. So the 911 board will say, we're gonna pay for meat and potatoes, but locals, you're gonna have to pay for vegetables.
And that's where in the project, the maintenance was $250,000 and our annual income is $230,000. So that's why I came to the Board of Supervisors for the funding.
So this is the 34A that's back there, and it's the bottom paragraph here. Anybody's interested in that funding that 911 qualifies for.
Just for reference purposes, does anybody know where in 34A gives the authority for the locals to make that, what you had stated, do you know what subsection or where in that it gives the authorization for that? Just to refer to it.
If you give me a minute, I have it on my computer and I can search.
It's in 34A.2, sub 5, sub B, sub A, 1A. There's two sections. There's called non-reoccurring costs and reoccurring costs. And it spells out, so for a non-reoccurring cost, you have 911 call processing equipment, internet and telephone access, database, addressing, training, and other capital expenditures. The reoccurring costs are very similar. 911 call processing equipment, internet and telephone access, equipment, database management, maintenance, including the purchase or lease of subscriber names, addresses, and telephone information. Reoccurring costs do not include personnel costs for public safety answering.
Thank you.
And if I may, the next paragraph is important too, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
My name is Blake DeRucci, I'm with Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management, I'm the 911 Program Manager that's referenced throughout 34A. The next paragraph is important as well, and that's where that phrasing comes from that Michelle was talking about, that litmus test, the cost directly attributable to the receipt and disposition of the 911 call. And then it kind of goes into the next sentence as well, but specifically excludes cost attributable to other emergency services, and I get that can get really bad and twisted quickly. Like, I don't have four.
Can I ask Blake?
Sure.
Blake, under 28, or chapter 34A, emergency telephone systems, is that ISIX? Is ISIX a 911 communication system?
I don't think ISIX is
Under
referenced in
34,
34.
that's my question. Because I see 911 emergency communication system, and I think some people are thinking that's the ISIX system, and that's not 34.
No, that's correct. ISIX is under 28 something.
ISIX is under 8028.
There are aids involved.
Now, you can get your radio
Absolutely.
by dispatch, the
Yeah.
disposition part of it.
So you can use the funds if you wanted to buy a radio. That's all started when the ISIX system was built. The sheriffs wanted to know how they were going to buy these expensive radios and police on the ISIX system, so that was allowed to purchase through that fund. Okay.
Because it's received in the.
But it's not in 30, ISIX is not in 34A.
No. I don't think ISIX by name is listed in 34.
Gotcha.
Okay, my handout's pretty self-explanatory. Doug Rolls had sent out last week this outline, and then I just kind of embellished it a little bit here. I'll just start off with funding. Funding our radio tower system or 911 emergency communication system. It is being funded by the Board of Supervisors right now. And then if you look at I, it says yearly maintenance. That's once the system is signed for. We have 11 years of maintenance on that system. And the sheriff will be paying that once it is signed for. The first year is free, and then we have to start paying. So then, of course, future replacement of another system. Right now, currently, we don't have any money being set aside, so that would also go to a bond, so it would come back to the Board of Supervisors if we do not retain ownership of it at this time.
Crystal, may I ask a question?
Yes.
So with regard to replacement, I know the board's talked about this. How would you envision setting that up? I apologize.
My
I'm
personal?
not trying to put you on the spot, but I think it's something.
I
that
think
should
it's
be
very
considered.
clear where my personal, it's having it, the ownership transfer to emergency management so that funding can be used off of the general supplemental. And they could, over the next 50 years, start setting money aside to either replace the system or in conjunction with the Board of Supervisors to bond a small amount for replacement, whatever that is. Maybe we don't need towers anymore. I don't know what that holds, but I certainly feel that had I had my brothers and learned everything that I learned about what I've gone through the last couple of years, I think that I would have definitely had a 28E in place before I went to the Board of Supervisors and asked for funding. Because I think ownership is a big key part of all of this right now. So, emergency, our communication system, the Board of Supervisors used, as Doug Hassan pointed out in our history, the essentials, the emergency essentials bond through debt levy. So that means every single citizen in Warren County is paying for this system, whether you're on it or not. And because no other governmental entity associated with 911 Emergency Communication System Project, meaning the 911 Board or Emergency Management Commission, they were not able to bond, so the 911 turned the project over to Emergency Management, who in turn asked the Board of Supervisors to bond for the system. So, I'm not going to read through everything, but I do want to explain. So, the yearly maintenance, the sheriff's budget is under the Board of Supervisors. Payment for the maintenance system is coming out of our general basic fund. Our general basic fund has been capped, I don't know how many years. It's set 3.5 and is not going anywhere unless legislation says we can. As we grow evaluations, that it becomes a bigger fund, but we cannot raise the levy on it. This year, we have a jail opening up, and our sheriff is going to be hiring 16 positions for that. That is around $800,000. Right now, our staff for the emergency communications, for our dispatch, is at 1.3 million. So if you put those two together, that's a huge amount we're asking. And this year, our valuations were low. And so what did we start with, 600,000?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me where the growth is coming from there. We were blessed with ARPA funds this year. That is the only reason why we were able to continue on the path that we are on right now. And we moved positions from dispatch as well as patrol over to rural basic, so that the pull is not on our general basic fund. Sorry, Michelle.
No, I interrupted you, and I'm sorry. My question was, so is the staffing sustainable?
Right now,
Or is there?
as long as it stays status quo, but I don't know, I mean, salaries. Every year, we always increase in salaries. So they get a merit one year, and then COLA. I think COLA is every year. And then merit every other year. So, and they're on a contract because they're under the sheriff, and I think their contract is at 2.5.
And is all of that built into your budgets to,
Not
as you
for
go
supervisors.
forward, to say?
That is why I
These are
asked.
effectively perpetual funds as employees, short of being a contract.
We would
employee.
not have been able to make that budget this year if it wasn't for ARPA funds
Okay.
and moving certain positions to rural basic. Rural basic, we collect the lost tax on, and we have more funds than what we can actually expend. We can only transfer so much to the engineer, and that goes 100% to tax relief. And so we have to cut that every year, at least for the rural basic. We either need to keep it the same or cut it. And we were able, with additional funds in that fund, we're able to move positions over. So sustaining this next year, I don't know how it's going to happen.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so, and then, my question has always been, how will future boards pay for the new personnel positions, training, increased pay, new vehicles, security needs, et cetera, for our sheriff's department, using general basic funds without jeopardizing the rest of our county funding? And then, item I is replacement of the entire system, and I think I covered that with Doug. Okay, funding B, dispatch, the same as 1A only. So much can be withdrawn from our general basic. Portable radios. I don't know if everybody picked up one of these from the back, but this is a resolution done in 2019 that you would not have received radios had the 911 board fought for them. No radios were included in the system because the price went up. Remember, every person within each jurisdiction had a radio coming to them, so we cut that down to every vehicle. And then we had Norwalk, who's not on our system, our old system, and they said, hey, we already have our radios. Our sheriff's department already have their radios. We had fire and police in Norwalk that already had theirs. So they said, hey, I think did Carlisle have theirs? No.
Indiana had theirs.
Indiana.
The police
The
department.
each police department had their radios.
Yeah, that's right. So they came and said, hey, where's our radios? What's in this for us? So was the result, was this resolution. A tower in Norwalk and radios for everyone else. And I think you guys got monies towards next purchase or something like that. So, but anyways, a lot of deals have been made for this system to come to pass. And D, all dispatch equipment, including consoles, are responsibility of 911 board. For the Iowa code, in Warren County, we have defined all responsibility of 911 board as being the receipt and distribution of 911 call to the towers. And of course, I think that's been explained. 2, decision making. 911 emergency communication system usage, including policies and procedures. The idea of only one person as a system administrator, which is currently Doug McCaslin, is not best practice. Succession planning with at least 2 or even 3 people would be best. These individuals need to keep in the forefront of their administrative duties the fact that this is a county-wide system. So in formulating our channels, talk groups, and permissions, how they're given out should be the benefit of the whole. B, dispatch management. Currently under one user of the Warren County system. Conflicts of interest. What if a deputy and a dispatcher, the sheriff's gonna side with? Will policies and procedures be fair? I think what you've come up with is excellent. We'll see how that goes. Users, currently old outdated policies. I think this is regurgitating what has been said before. Go to ownership. 911 emergency communication system, this is an entire countywide system. I can't say that enough. I just want to keep saying that. It is just not one person's system anymore. The key word is interoperability. The Board of Supervisors understands financial impact to all of our citizens, therefore the bonding required through our board. However, long-term funding and day-to-day decision-making are not part of the capabilities, skill set, and use for or time investment necessary of a Board of Supervisors. I'm talking about the board. The Board of Supervisors' ownership of the system shows lack in forethought, timing, planning, and proper understanding of the pros and cons of politics and power struggles that exist within county governments. I will take full responsibility, like I said before, of not getting the proper 28E agreement in place before endeavoring to get a 911 emergency communication system project from the Board of Supervisors to bond. Again, this does not negate the fact that this is an entire countywide system and policies and procedures, governance, and oversight should be approved by each jurisdiction, elected representative countywide for their taxpayers and users within those jurisdictions. Again, we have a board of users in 911, but you were appointed by someone who was elected. And your responsibility is to the citizens, but you don't have a direct line to the citizens. The citizen cannot come to you and say, I don't like your decision, I'm voting you out. There has to be that accountability. So yes, you can come up with all the policies and procedures, but there has to be a governance body over you of electeds. This is my opinion here. Dispatch equipment, covered that. Again, dispatch supervisor for the next fiscal year. Okay, let's go over this. Anything between the call and the towers excluding employees. We are covered in our are we covered in our understanding? I think that we got how 911 and what we're responsible for. The 911 board should be approving equipment budget of dispatch supervisor for the next fiscal year during budget time. then allowing those funds to be managed by the dispatch supervisor with coding of invoices done by 911 director, then final elected governance board, committee, commission established by a 28E agreement. Again, this is, the sheriff gave you his opinion on how he wants the policies and procedures. I'm giving you my opinion on how I think the funding and the ownership of the system should be. For dispatch employees, look back at 2B plus the explanation that dispatch supervisor under the sheriff has to ask permission for new employees from the board of supervisors. For 20 years, dispatch had no new positions put in their department. Because the board of supervisors said, you don't need new people. You have 9 people, you have plenty. I know for a fact there was people, 1 person on duty at times. I know for a fact what else on here. Excessive amounts of overtime, accumulated massive vacations, comp times, and for a department that had 9 employees. Last year, we finally had a new board. We gave the sheriff 3 new employees, desperately needed. You think in that 20 years we had no funds for dispatch? Of course we did. Do you think during those 20 years we didn't have enough training for them? I don't know. You think during those 20 years the board of supervisors was asked by the sheriff that he needed more people? Do you think we didn't have any growth in that time? I think it's very neglectful of us to keep our dispatch under the board of supervisors' control, which under the sheriff, that's where they're at. So that's my opinion. And again, I'll read this. I will attest that I support the transfer of 911 communication system to the Emergency Management Commission through a thought-out, well-participated in and agreed-upon 28E agreement to ensure complete representation, fair input on usage, and financial streamlining of our countywide system. Any questions? Thank you.
So our next discussion item is, Doug has been the admin of this system from building. Tom has come in to lead the dispatch and communication center, and we need to get in writing basically roles and the responsibilities of Doug and Tom and pretty much the 911 board and the sheriff's office. So we have everything in writing and there's no questions moving forward. No, go ahead.
If it's okay, sorry that, I don't want to disrupt it. Whose responsibility is that? I mean, because what I've heard in this meeting, and I think, first of all, this has been a great meeting, and there's been a lot of nice and intelligent things being said, and I'm tracking. I don't know these systems, but I'm tracking with the culture of what's going on here, and I really appreciate it. When the attorney came in, and I think the sheriff, and even Crystal, I think we kind of all agree that we need a structure to guide us. Who's in charge of what? And I think once we build that foundation, the roles and responsibilities will kind of fall out based on that foundation that we're all going to hopefully build together. We're all going to have input into this. So when I came to this, I was notified of this meeting last Friday, and I saw that roles and responsibility, and I was getting little grumblings of some issues between some personnel, and I don't really think this committee wants to go to an us versus them scenario where we're, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't work. We just all lose at that point. So I think we should be careful at this point, and I think we should try to figure out how we're going to do like the document that the attorney wants, like that defines how we're going to structure ourselves and some kind of organizational chart. Does that make sense? How can we develop those things? Who can help us do those things? If we can assign some things like that, I'm going to jump in any role that I could possibly help with. I can run committee or help support a committee, or I'm willing to do whatever we can, but I think we start at the overarching structure, and that will help us make these decisions as we roll down through it. That's just my opinion.
Nope, I think that's perfect, and we need to get in writing basically what, I shouldn't say Doug and Tom, it should be what 911 board is doing and is in charge of, and what the sheriff over personnel and stuff is in charge of, and who's paying for what, and just so there's no questions asked behind the doors and it's all in writing. I guess, how do we move forward on that from the 911 board and the board of supervisors? Where do we want to start with this?
That's a good question.
I speak.
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
I think one of the important things is to remember that the 911 board, again, is the oversight. When we start to engage in trying to tell them how to run it, then we start to step in on the professionals and what we expect them to do, which becomes very hard if somebody in a political position, such as a city council person, begins to tell me how to do my job as a firefighter. That becomes very clouded and becomes very difficult for me to perform my job and to serve the citizens well. And again, I think when we structure that, we need to understand that whoever we put in charge of that dispatch center, we need to give them the space to do their job. With that, I think one of the concerns that I see out here that exist is I can't run, you can't expect a fire chief to run his personnel and somebody else to run his apparatus. In order for him to do his job effectively, he has to be able to have control of his equipment and know how the equipment operates, what needs to be replaced, what needs to be changed as far as policy, and kind of lead that. And so I think if we try to separate the one and say this person's going to navigate the equipment, this person's going to navigate the personnel, that's not worked so far. That's the position we're in, and if we continue down that road, we're gonna struggle with that. I can tell you just from a personal perspective that the Emergency Management Commission has a lot of responsibilities, and there's a lot that gets done, but he doesn't have the support he necessarily needs to do his job, and I don't know that we're going to get him additional support to be able to manage something like this. And so having the sheriff be able to do that and trying to figure out how to fund that, I think is a great idea myself. I understand the financial perspective of having under emergency management to be able to collect more revenue. I don't know if that's the answer. Perhaps it's fee-based, I don't know. And again, then you got users of the system. So who are your largest users? What agencies? And when you get, there is a difference in operational policy between, well, different jurisdictions and different departments, and maybe not so much on the police department side. When you get to the fire side, based on the population you serve and based on the type of service you run, be it a volunteer or a full-time service or maybe a combination service. There's quite a bit of difference there about what your expectations are and what you struggle with to serve your citizens as far as what our expectations are and what we struggle with. That might differentiate the policy, and so there has to be some sort of negotiation in that. And if you're not representing that, Brian Shears sitting on that committee is great, but he isn't going to have, a broad knowledge of what are we trying to achieve to meet the metrics in the fire department, such as our turnout times and response time, different things of that nature that affect that. So these are all concerns that I have in this discussion. Again, having, just to keep ourselves focused on being the governing board, finding the funding, and making sure that it's judicious expenditures of the funding, and that's spent appropriately. As far as the E911, Doug's been overwhelmed. I can tell you that, just listening to his voicemails and having talked to him and trying to get his 911 signs out. And so, I don't know that you have the help, and so maybe yours is more the focus of taking care of the addressing and the mapping and the signage, and maybe letting that dispatch center go. All just discussion and things to think about. And that's really just because some of the thoughts I've had in the discussion that's been going on so far. So.
Can I just
go ahead, Sheriff.
Throw out some numbers? Yep. So, I think as we go forward, one thing to keep in mind, I dug 2020, 2021, and then 2022, obviously January 1 to current. Like in 2020, we had just over 35,000 calls for service. Of those 35,000 calls for service, 4,392 came in to the comm center through some sort of 911 system, you know, either a land or cellular, right? And then that was 12.5% of all the calls that came, and understand, these are calls for service, so this is let me explain that, just so everybody's on the level playing field there. A call for service is when a call comes in, dispatch takes it and they actually create a card, because, you know, it's not just that, hey, I need to talk to sheriff about a gun permit. Okay, that's a call that just gets transferred, right? There's no call for service for that. This is something where there's a car accident, there's an assault, there's a cow out, and we've dispatched a deputy or a fire department. In 2020, we had 12.5% of our total calls for service come in through some sort of 911 source. 2021, we're sitting at 17.2. 2022, so far to date, we're sitting at 17.0%. I think those numbers, when you're talking roughly an 80-20 split, we need to keep in mind too, and this is where I get so much into the users, the fire chiefs and everybody else. This doesn't account for, I don't want I guess what I'm saying here is I don't want our radio system to be just observed as a 911 communication system. It is a conduit for 911, absolutely. But it is a radio system for everybody, just like the municipalities that want to come on board. It's a complete radio system. I think we need to keep that in mind too, because I get it, there's some separation of equipment, but a lot of that equipment has a multiple use within that comm center. And we need to keep that in mind too. If the comm center is gonna run on a percentage split like that, we need to keep that in mind as we delegate, okay, whose responsibility is this, whose responsibility is that?
And right now, we have 16 users on our radio system. And a lot of them don't think Warren County Public Health is on it. Carlisle Public Works is on it. Carlisle Electrical is on it. So it's more than just fire and EMS also.
Emergency management's on it.
Yeah, emergency management's on it too. So how do we want to go about getting this structure built so we can best use the system and let the taxpayers know that we're using it to the full potential?
I think you should start with pods of groups of whatever that may be. Work those kinks that we have, like the sheriff and his stuff, maybe the other law enforcement work together, and then the fire and EMS and whatever else. Figure out those breaks in the chain that we have today and how that can work, and then bring it back as a group with 2 to 3 groups that you create the pods, put them together and brainstorm how that's going to work, and maybe you'll figure it out that way. Because if we just, my old saying is everybody said, here's what you say, is kick the can down the road. Well, the can is rusted out, broken, or just a string it together, ain't no way going to hear it. So we got this new system, we got a new can on each end. Let's not just keep kicking it around. Let's figure out. And I think you got the users in this room. You got state, you've got Des Moines, you've got local, you've got county. So I think a mixture of those. How, if you want to divide it up in sheriff and law enforcement and fire, or do you want to put a couple on each team of different jurisdictionals, and figure out those breaks in the chain that we have now, and each one work on it and figure out a solution, and then come back together, not as a big room, but as a smaller group, and then bring it back to the full 911 board. That way you're not creating huge meetings like this and we're not getting anything accomplished. I think this is a great meeting from some of the meetings I attended in the past, where the darts are being thrown and personalities are getting huge. Because we all have a task to do, and this is serve the public. And we need to also protect the responder that's using the system, that goes out to protect the public. Because the public's not always nice, as the sheriff would say, and even some of the fire guys can say. So the radio is your lifeline sometimes, and we want to make sure it works correctly. And whatever that may be, I know years ago we went to Plain Talk. I'm from the old world of 10 codes. And It took a while for everybody across the state to get used to using the plain text or plain talk, however you want to say it. So it is going to take time, but I think we can figure out the breaks in the chain today and put groups together, or pods I call them, and brainstorm this, figure it out, put up flow charts, discussion, however you want to do it, then come back to a bigger group with the other pods, and then bring it back to the commission and down one board, and then, yeah, you guys, board of supervisors, so.
But to that note, wouldn't we want to know some concerns per se at this point in time, or issues that people feel might be? So as a group, if we break out into subdivisions or whatever, pods, then there's kind of a goal. If everybody was come back, say we came back with another meeting and addressed the concerns that jurisdictions have, and you basically then have bullet points to work off of.
Right.
Because I don't think you're gonna solve anything by just getting everybody in a pod, and then all 3 different pods, if that's what you have, are working all towards a whole different goal. I think you've gotta be on the same page before you can get them pods in place, because if not, then this pod might have a whole different, I mean, which that isn't bad also, but I think there needs to be a collective goal at the start of that, so everybody's on the same page and understand. Yes.
I had an old boss that told me, you know, if you're complaining about it being broke or don't work, then come back and tell them how to
Right.
fix the solution, and that's where we're at. I think that's exactly where we're at. And Doug came in with the legal side of things, and people were puckering because Doug got involved, but as he explained, we gotta make this legal. We also gotta make it work so we don't get sued as individuals or as in the county, city, or whatever, and to work under those guidelines. We all work under federal, state, local guidelines, so I think we can figure it out. It's just not worry about what the other group's doing. We may have all, if you want to put it all, that we have the same directives, then 2 or 3 groups work on that, and then come together, you're working on the same directives, but see what they come up with, then come to the middle and make it work. Because if you just keep having committees, which I know that's government, but you have a committee for another committee to a committee, you just don't get anywhere. So I might be babbling, but I know it works if you get together and talk.
Will that discussion help determine, again, how it's funded and who's in charge? Is that gonna be, those are 2 of the key items that we're really kind of wrestling over, that we just can't seem to establish who is in charge of what, and then how do we fund
That should be
it.
one
I think
of the
that's
directives.
something that needs to be defined tonight for, number one, for Tom and Doug's sake. They need to know what their roles and responsibilities are. Because, you know, you brought up a brand new dispatch supervisor. He needs to know what he's able to do and what he's responsible for. And same thing with Doug. Doug also needs to know what he's responsible for as
So that should be
well.
one of your directives, is to put those 2 positions and figure it out. I think that's the best way to.
Does the dispatch supervisor have a job description? Okay.
I don't know what it is.
Okay. That outlines what he's supposed to do. And, I mean, I think figuring that out on who's responsible for what is going to help get to that point, because they can help lead some of those conversations.
And there's some accountability to it then.
So Doug and I are you guys' employees, whether it's the commission, the 911, whatever, we're the employee side, so we see the action side of things. You guys are supposed to be doing the management side of things, and so let's figure out how to manage it.
Tom, you want to talk? You say
So, I haven't looked behind the scenes all here, but a lot of people that are here gave me my knowledge and experience through chairing the board for how many years I was chair and forming those committees. So the experience in this room, 2 sat beside me, especially my mentor Rob, got the structure built for ISIX, right? In order to do what you're doing today, you have to identify the ownership, understand the technologies. It's crucial. 911 communications is not ISIX. 911 communications is the EZNet in the 911 call from the cell phone to the center. And then you gotta know how the law is applied, like our county attorney says, to each of those technologies when it comes to 34A and 8028 and 29. Then you can build your structure. And that's based on my experience, my opinion only, but I couldn't have done what I did without the experience that is sitting beside me in this room. And the 911 program manager, couldn't have done it without him. I'd call him up and say, how do we do this? You know, based on the law, you can do this, you can't do this. That's just my 2 cents.
Tom, what is your opinion on how we should, what's our next step? Is it to build out a hierarchy, or is it to figure out roles and responsibilities and let that?
I think to build a hierarchy will identify your roles and responsibilities, just a little, you know, and then it'll solve itself. But you gotta, who owns it? What's the law that says you can do on both of the technologies?
Here's the issue. We gotta get going on this. Like, this isn't something we can mess around with for 60 days or 90 days. To me, we assign 3 to 5 people to a group. I don't care if you call it a committee or whatever you call it, but the smartest people in this room, and I can tell you that's not me. I don't know who that is. They get in a room and they figure out this structure, and they bring it back to the next meeting here, and we all sit there and we get an input on what that structure is, and we make some decisions at that next meeting.
I'd actually like to do 2 committees. One, policy and procedure for the users that the sheriff we set up. We had a meeting with all the fire chiefs and the emergency personnel. We didn't have the public works and stuff in that meeting, and every chief voted on setting up that structure to basically as a subcommittee and then bring it back to all the users. And I think we need to move forward on that.
Policies and procedures of what?
Basically how the dispatch is gonna operate and that kind of stuff. Is that how?
It is, and I think also too,
Yes.
given recent conversations,
Yes.
and especially tonight's meeting, do we want those policies and procedures to cover, I guess, certain disputed responsibilities now, and that may be something that chiefs
Yeah.
and users have to figure out as we go through. I mean, currently, and
Well, you have dispatch policies internal to
Yeah.
the center, and then you have policies and protocols on the use of the system.
Yeah,
Right? One should talk to the other.
correct.
Right? At some point, yeah, does it start with dispatch? Yeah, it does in some cases, because that's where it all starts, right? It can't start without we disposing of it through the radio and all that stuff, right? So that's how that kind of works that way. But you've got a lot of talent here, you'll get it figured out. And I'm here to give back my knowledge, whatever I can do to help. I'll do anything you want, just let me know what you want me to do.
And for the time being, the Board of Supervisors has placed it back under the sheriff's position, right?
and
I think the question is, like, we've put dispatch back underneath the sheriff, but I think the big question is, this brand new system that we have, who gets to own that? Who gets to manage that? And I think that's the elephant in the room, like, what does that mean? But I think we answer that question by figuring out who's in charge of towers, the maintenance, who's in charge of dispatch, who's in charge of the E911, you call it the system, or the communication system. We kind of have to define that. I don't know if that's defined.
Is that legally something that we can handle under a 28E then that the 911 board's responsible for? And if so, then we have to identify our cost, and then we have to find it, how are we gonna budget, how are we gonna make this up? Is it done?
So here's another question I'm gonna ask the board. With all these other users, like Indianola Public Works is interested in coming on, Southeast Orange School District, is this something that the Board of Supervisors should make their own communication department within the county? Like there's public health, there's different, that way it's under its own entity and like there's a governing board over it or something like that.
Those are the questions we have to ask.
Yes.
That's a great question. That's what we need to figure out.
Yeah.
So I think there's, I'm sorry.
Go, please go
No,
ahead.
please.
I see there's really 2 big elephants, if you will. There's the communication center and all of its function and operations. And then there's the radio system.
Yes.
I see them as.
That's exactly what I'm
two-
seeing too.
Two very separate things. They're interrelated,
Yes.
but they're very separate. Because the radio system does really more, touches more agencies than the dispatch center does. All of the agencies that are affiliated with the communications center are also on the radio system. And then there's more on the radio system. So that might make some sense to separate those two, so that they're not.
And that's why I was kinda
so it's
thinking
not
the two
quite
groups
so-
and-
So big of an elephant
Yeah.
to eat, that dispatch, and I personally think the dispatch question is pretty simple. It's under the sheriff, and the sheriff has a manager, supervisor, whatever your title is, sir.
And he's pretty much put a subcommittee
Is
together
responsible for
that
the
was all
dispatch
agreed
center.
upon, and
And they provide a service to the agencies, and however the sheriff decides to provide service to his agencies,
yeah.
that's between them and the agency, see Norwalk. I mean, you know, however they want to work that out.
But we've kind of
The
already
radio system.
attacked that, right?
It's
Is-
just, we haven't officially put it in writing yet, but yes,
Right.
it's pretty much
To me,
done,
that-
it's in
that's-
writing.
That's a little more solved.
Yep.
Whereas the radio system is a much bigger question.
Correct.
That we can perhaps focus our energies on the radio system. And maybe that gets divided into public safety and non-public safety because it functions different. Same system, but
Yes.
I think you know what I'm trying to say.
Like if it's for dispatch, emergency, fire, police, that's one issue. If it's for the school district or something else, that's a whole other issue.
I mean, it may end up that way, that this is the public safety
Public
process.
safety versus.
And this is non-public safety process,
Administrative,
perhaps.
That makes sense.
The rumbling's going on, you're getting, with Kentucky's war going on, the other school districts will see that.
They won't.
They're gonna wanna probably move over too, so you're gonna end up having other entities eventually,
Yep, that'd be
other
good.
schools,
For sure, yep.
do that, and I think it's a great thing, really. Far as my perspective in emergency planning, there's even such a thing as in the schools where at the front desk, there's a panic button that they can push. And that would probably be tied to the radio system somehow, some way, I don't know all that techie stuff. I know Dallas County uses one, a lot of the schools, so this system will grow. I know it just from the rumblings of people talking and going, well, what if, and can this, and all those questions. So what you're deciding today is a big step forward, understanding that there's not all emergency responders that will be on there. Because if your secondary roads move to it, possibly, or your public works in your different cities, possibly, there's that possible. So you're not gonna always have emergency responders for law, fire, EMS. So keep that in mind.
Tom, do you?
Don't let the word subsystem administrator think it's like this huge, enormous task. You can make that what you want, okay? When we developed the system, the system administrator, and we required a subsystem administrator. It's in policy all over the place, basic, right? That could be just a POC, because we wanted somebody to say, hey, Warren County, you have a problem here. I need somebody to call. You gotta do something with this radio. Okay, that was the intent. So you can take that to this level, or you can keep it here at this level and contract everything you need out to EE.
Yeah.
Whatever you wanna do. Or if you have the talent, you can create your own, you can have your person, like your IT person, who's a geek on computers and radios, go into the end client, change your talk groups around, throw some over the air for your rekeying, your encryption, do that all yourself, or you can hire it to be done. But
Yeah.
the subsystem administrator is what you want it to be. Don't think it has to be this high level person, right?
So who wants to head this committee that basically the funding and the structural part of it? Because I feel like we have the procedures down and getting everything that done. So we need to figure out this other committee or group to bring back.
I would just default back to those who have the technical skills, and I have neither.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
But you do have a good understanding of user need, you have a good understanding of structure, I think. Yeah, I think you have a good macro understanding. I think you'd be a good leader, just my opinion. I think that Doug should be, like, we should have someone like Aaron leading it. This is my opinion. I mean, I don't care. I'm just throwing an idea out. But if Aaron led it and Doug was on that, and I think we should get Doug and Tom together on a committee like this and let them work together as a team, building what they want to build. I think that would be a good
I think
team
they should be
builder.
on both committees, quite frankly. I think they need to be on the roles and responsibilities, along with probably the sheriff, and then they probably both need to be on the funding committee, so they're both in the know of what's going on.
See, that's where the confusion is. I think we're talking about the structure committee, like how this is gonna, what the organizational chart, what the document the sheriff needs. I think that's the first piece, but I defer to you on what we should be working on, like if it's, because if we build that, the roles and responsibilities will come out of that. So if we put, or whoever you think, for sure. I mean, I'm just throwing out some names, but I think would be a good committee based on the limited number of people I even know here. So if Aaron led it and Tom was on it and Doug was on it, like everybody, like the users are on it, the 911's on it, the dispatch is on it.
So are you good with being on it, Aaron?
I can help try to guide it, guys, I don't have the time.
I think we need law enforcement on it too.
Yeah.
Matt, Tom,
Yeah.
Aaron, Doug, Matt, and personally, I think one of the board of supervisors should be on it. Darren, do you want to?
Yeah, I do.
You?
I'd
And
love
then
to. I'd love
we
to
can
be
keep
on it.
moving forward.
And that's
Then
exactly.
we're taking notes, putting this in writing, so.
And,
Just so I know I'll forget this.
and I'll be in charge of setting up the meeting times, getting everybody there, and just keeping the dialogue going. But I'd like to present something back to your next meeting,
Yeah,
like where we're at. Like,
Yeah,
I think we can,
We need to keep moving forward.
this isn't that complex, building the structure. We don't have that many things. But we just have to figure out where we position them, and that's gonna, if you're on this, we get to have input into that, but everybody will. We're all gonna put input into that, and we're gonna get this right. We're gonna get as much buy-in as we can from everybody, so we'll try to get it structured. But like Sheriff Carrico has said, we need to get our dispatch going. Like, we don't wanna hold up policies and procedures within dispatch. How do we measure what our dispatch is doing? How do we up the level of service? That's where we have to get to. Don't wait on us. Let's do all that. And let's go.
I will tell you this, I'm a huge believer in best practice. We do not have to reinvent the policy on dispatch.
Exactly.
I've got a stack already, I've got 3 departments already giving me stuff, I'm gonna get it nationally, locally, Iowa, Warren, so we can get it done in a fairly decent time frame.
And
And
I would
policies that are important the most, the ones we do the most, pursuits, shooting, school shooting, all that stuff on how that dispatcher is supposed to work
Yep.
and call.
And there's 2 good comm centers sitting right next to it that we can
Yes.
steal a lot of information from.
And I would think, because like I said, I went to that subcommittee.
Yes.
A while back for dates, and we're gonna have one here in March, so if we are decided on that, I'll put an email out tomorrow in the morning, and we'll set a date. I'll throw out a couple, 3 or 4 dates, we'll have our first one, and get moving. 'Cause
Just so we move forward, do you want to do a vote of all 911 board here, just so we have it in writing documented that we're going to do the subcommittee, the structure committee,
Who's on it?
and and go over who's on the both committees? Everyone go with that? Okay, for the structure committee, it would be Darren, Matt, Aaron, Doug, and Tom.
Does Joe need to be on it?
I would say with Tom
Or is
being
Tom
on there.
good?
I was kinda thinking
The sheriff's
Tom would
office, I think
be
that would- yeah, that'd be a great
represented.
representation of the
Okay.
sheriff's office.
Okay.
So structure is Darren, Matt, Aaron, Tom, Doug.
Yes. Can I get a motion from the 911 board?
I mean,
Second? All in favor?
Who seconded
Aye.
it? Let's do a roll call.
Oh, roll call? Okay.
Who seconded it?
Michelle seconded.
Who made the motion then?
Joe.
Okay. Carlisle.
Aye.
Des Moines.
Aye.
Hartford.
Aye.
Indianola. Jackson Township. Lacona.
Aye.
Martinsdale.
Aye.
Milo.
Aye.
New Virginia.
Aye.
Northern Warren's not here. Norwalk.
Excuse me, aye.
Pleasantville.
Aye.
Warren County.
Aye.
Warren County Emergency Management.
Aye.
Warren County Sheriff.
Aye.
West Des Moines.
Aye.
All aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, so then the sub-user committee group, Sheriff, who was all on that?
So going off of our other
Yep.
meeting that we had, it was the president and vice president of the Warren County Fire Association.
Okay.
The sitting Carlisle and Indianola police chief.
Yep.
And myself. And then the committee were the representatives of the user.
Yes.
So who's the president of the Warren County Fire? Okay. Who's the vice president?
I am.
Okay, great.
And I guess with Indianola kind of being in a transition of chief, we would just take the turn of chief.
That's why.
Okay.
You good on? No. Any discussion on that?
Need a motion and a second.
What's the purpose of that committee? I'm sorry.
So the subcommittee is basically so you don't have too large of a group to just kind of narrow down your policies and procedures. So basically, they're just kind of guiding things through the funnel. And then once a policy or procedure is approved by the subcommittee of a simple majority, then it will go to the whole committee before it ever becomes an actual policy or procedure. So the subcommittee does not set or finalize anything. They just kind of guide it through as far as from an EMS, fire, law enforcement standpoint. Just to minimize, because like when we discussed trying to get everybody with, if we were starting from scratch from having to put all the policies and procedures together, trying to get the big group together as often as we need to be productive at it, that we just didn't think that was going to happen.
And we're talking about policies and procedures to dispatch.
Yes.
correct? So just my 2 cents worth, we're using the president and vice president of the Warren County Fire Chief Association, which are both volunteer agencies.
Yes.
So then the paid agencies are not being represented.
They-
And we
they-
do do things a little bit differently sometimes.
Mhm. So when we discussed that, we didn't want to get too heavy on paid departments versus volunteer. That's why we would have the police chief of Indianola and Carlisle. So that way the city of Indianola has a representative, the city of Carlisle has a representative. The volunteer departments combined have 2 representatives or potentially at least right now, because the president and vice president are both volunteer. But like I said, as we guide those policies kind of through the funnel, then it goes to the whole committee, which every chief is there.
And we had Chief Chia and Carlisle's fire chief, and they both
Yeah.
agreed upon this committee. is
We
how
did
they
discuss
wanted it.
initially 7.
Yes.
And as a group, we agreed to narrow that to 5, with Indianola and Carlisle being represented by their police chiefs instead of their police and fire chiefs. So we went from 7 to 5. That was discussed already.
And
If
it's
that
like
answers your question.
Tom said, we're not gonna reinvent the wheel. A lot of this is gonna come out of Des Moines, Polk County, Dallas County, and a lot of West Comp stuff.
Yep.
Because there's no point in reinventing it when these other agencies have already set everything up
No,
for us.
absolutely, yeah.
So,
But trying to get 15 or 16 people together 2 to 3 times a month with every
No, I
other
understand the
committee
purpose of the
is-
subcommittee.
yeah.
I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
everybody's represented
Yeah, exactly.
appropriately.
and if there's something Indianola, if they have stuff that they want brought up, bring it to me, because it's in my opinion, it's easier for a volunteer department to adapt to how Indianola runs 20 calls a day over some stuff like that.
And
So
just
that's
understand it's just a different perspective.
Exactly, and that's my thing too, yep. So, any other discussion on that topic?
Did you have a second?
No, I haven't got a motion yet.
Oh, yeah.
So can I get a motion on that?
Can I have clarification?
Yes, go ahead.
So the subcommittee then goes to the full board of 911 to approve?
It would be
policy?
the user committee. So basically,
All of the fire chiefs, all the police.
Yeah, fire and police chiefs.
So that's who we, okay. Thank you.
What, and if we want to include, so I have a list of users here. If emergency management wants to be on the final committee, or public health and stuff, I don't see why they couldn't.
And as our radio system usage grows, I mean, there's a reason departments go over their policies every so many years.
Exactly.
It's because you have changes, and then, yeah, I mean, to the full committee, or if we want to say, hey, let's add another person, the only thing I would like to do is stay with an odd number in the subcommittee. Just because then you're not, that's a 3-3, so it needs to be, it either passes or fails the first time, so we're not spinning our wheels.
Okay.
And I've got no problem with the structure, but again, to echo Jen's concerns, I think, and again, leaning into the metro, even duplicating their policies, we always got to be cautious about, because if we're going to move forward and develop a good solid relationship, we do rely on each other. I can't tell you the amount of times we've mutual aid in the last few days. And vice versa.
Exactly.
But understanding that, we have to make sure that it works for everybody.
Correct.
It fits for everybody.
Right, because I'll say that, you know, as part of another system, it's still important that our organization is represented at that meeting too, because they may not have the same perspective as we do. And so that's my only point there, is that the fire side is being represented by the volunteer departments.
Correct.
And not the paid departments.
Yep.
But also too, and I guess, you know, that's where you have, I guess in my mind, how I imagine it working is like I said with the police chiefs, having, you know, answering to their mayors or their city managers for that, but then also too, I'm kind of in a unique spot here where I've got to work with the paid departments and I've got to work with the volunteers. So that's where, you know, kind of being the number 5 or the odd vote, if you will. There may be some things that we agree on with Enola, and some things we say, hey, you know, I've seen both sides of this, so yeah.
Is there a reason why we can't have, to address this concern, a fire chief from one of the bigger cities and a police chief from one of the bigger cities, and then vice versa for the smaller? To address that, like what?
That, I mean, I think that's a
you
more
have two
accurate
police
representation
chiefs.
of what we're trying to accomplish, some common procedures.
You follow me,
just
Joe?
to-
Like you follow, okay, so you have two police chiefs you have a police chief from Indianola and a police chief from Carlisle, and then you got the president, vice president for the fire departments, which are in smaller towns. So why can't we have a police from a smaller town and a fire,
That's the sheriff's office.
So you're but her fire department isn't represented from a bigger city, so is there a way to do that? That's what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
And you have, and I'm just throwing it out, like, I don't want to disrupt your committee at all, but why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we have?
Well, like I said,
a fire chief?
originally when we were all there, we had discussed 7, and just as a group, that's what we agreed on was 5.
And all the fire chiefs were there.
And I think
Yeah.
Martinsdale, Hartford, and Northern Warren, I think, were absent.
Yes.
But, so 3 of them were absent, but and I actually think, I don't remember who mentioned it, but I actually think it was one of the fire chiefs that said, hey, why don't we just associate these duties with the president and vice president, whoever they may be.
I'm pretty sure it was Corey from
Yeah.
Carlisle that said
I
that.
understand and hear where you guys are coming from. Again, I'm part of another organization that if we're not represented at the table, sometimes decisions get made that could have impacted us different had we been there to provide an input. That's all I'm saying.
So on the fire side, do you do 2 paid departments and 2 volunteer departments?
You could, and it wouldn't.
Or
wouldn't
one and
stress
one.
that. Or one and one.
I just, how do you,
And
how does that person then get elected or appointed every?
That's the discussion point
Right.
here.
And if we're trying to unite things, we may not get nor walk back on the communication system, we may or may not, I don't know, that's not our job, but like, we're working with another agency that we have to still work with that department, so maybe including them on that is that bridge to that gap, I don't know. And then they have a say on the full-time side.
She's gonna have input from Westcom because that's how they operate, and you run the ideas that way. I think you're missing a vote if you don't put her on part of it.
Just a thought.
Well, so without having a fire chiefs meeting, can we just say, pick off the vice president?
I'm all for
add Nora, so-
Yep, I'm all for that.
All right, I make a motion that that's our committee.
Perfect.
motion.
Anything else? You
Guess I just learned my lesson.
Wait, who's the vice on the association?
Me, thank God.
Jake is.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Wait a second.
Oh, I don't know about that. Well, you guys discuss, I mean, it's open for, discussion.
It's, if someone wants to second that,
Second.
perfect. Let's do roll call.
So instead of vice president, it is Norwalk having the. Okay.
I have 14 wasted copies now.
White out.
Who seconded? Aaron?
Aaron.
I just had a comment. So, how often is that gonna be, revised or changed or?
I mean, it should be a living it should be a living,
Are you talking about like the subcommittee?
Subcommittee?
Yeah.
I guess I would envision that to be as the full committee sees, or someone as part of the E911 board, or someone as part of the board of supervisors says, hey guys, we're bringing on more users, we need to reevaluate this. Then it would come back and be revisited. I mean, just like we do the policies every couple of years, you go over them, or maybe we just do that every. It's not like there's a lot of policies govern that, so every year we sit down and reevaluate, hey, who are our users? Do we want to consider expanding the committees?
and here's a question I have just on this makeup, is if we're putting a standing one that it's Norwalk, then next year we vote in Corey as the president of the association, then you have two paid departments that are.
That's true.
So,
So,
how do we weigh that?
I agree with it, I agree with
Yeah.
you on that.
I think
So,
it should just be one paid and one volunteer
One volunteer, and
representative.
then-
However, we do that every year. depends
Determined
on-
by the
yeah.
Warren.
Determined by the Warren County Fire Service.
Yeah, that's perfect.
One paid,
That
one.
works.
that's,
You with that?
No, yeah, I'm
Good.
Seriously?
Scotty, did you just amend your motion?
I amend my motion.
Okay.
second, still.
Ready to do roll call on that?
Carlisle.
Aye.
What's on the table, I'm sorry.
The subcommittee would be the Carlisle Police Chief, Indianola Police Chief, the Sheriff, one paid fire chief, one volunteer fire chief.
And just to clarify, the fire chief there, it's voted on by the fire chiefs.
Voted on by the Fire Association.
Okay.
Des Moines,
Aye.
Hartford. Did he say? Oh, sorry. I'm old and deaf. Indianola.
Aye.
Jackson Township.
Aye.
Lacona.
Aye.
Martinsdale.
Aye.
Milo.
Aye.
New Virginia.
Aye.
Norwalk.
Aye.
Pleasantville.
Aye.
Warren County.
Aye.
Warren County Emergency Management.
Aye.
Warren County Sheriff.
Aye.
West Des Moines.
Aye.
So one other item that needs to be discussed tonight is Motorola has reached out right now the board kind of put Doug as a point of contact because he was the only one at the time. Now with Tom in here too, Motorola reached out who is gonna be the point of contact for Warren County. Are we keeping it Doug? Are we gonna Tom? And we need to make that decision so Motorola knows going forward. And
Isn't that determined on whoever takes over the radios and?
right now, it's still under the Board of Supervisors since it's under the construction.
And there's a lot of things that need to be, I mean, we're meeting with the grounding, we're meeting with
Yes.
this. So someone just needs to be that point of contact.
Yes, the Board of
to-
Supervisors really need to make that decision so Motorola knows who to be contacting and if you want to make it.
And we'll work together no matter which way.
Let me give you the history, it's fair to give you the history.
Yo, go ahead.
When Motorola, I was talking with Motorola, this is when I was on another project, they were saying that Doug was a point of contact, and then I got hired, I said, I need to work with Doug together, to include me in on your meetings, okay? They need permission from Doug to include me on the meetings, not necessarily replace Doug. They need permission from Doug to include me, but that got blown to, I'm replacing him, and it went from there. So
That's-
that's exactly what
Yeah, it's
happened.
not per se a change, it's just an.
No, they just wanted to know, because Motorola's rules, they cannot give me
Okay.
anything without his permission, because he's the guy. That's what developed.
Board, are you okay giving, I guess, oh, I guess, are
We're
you?
gonna have a resolution to do that.
To do what? Like,
To
if we
allow
keep Doug
the-
as the contact, that's fine, but
Yeah.
he needs to include Tom in the
No,
meeting.
absolutely, and I have been, I have
Just
been
right
including him in
now,
the meeting.
Since you fall in, I get the board did the resolution, but since you fall under the E911 commission, would that be more of an E911 board decision, or is it a board decision?
The board owns the
Because
system
we
right
own
You
now,
own the system, okay.
and their contract is with the Warren County Board of Supervisors. And the only question we had on the whole thing was Tom dealing directly with Motorola, or was he being part of the group? Because there was phone calls made directly to Motorola requesting information, and that's where they asked if they're, so that was the only point.
It should be two. There should be two.
And that's
I believe that
fine.
there should be two, and I know that we're pretty much united on this, but I really would like to include Aaron as our chair of our board, not only that, but to send a strong message that we are in agreement with that. I don't know if we can make some kind of resolution tonight and then say we're gonna do.
Well, you have a board meeting
The 15th, isn't it?
Tuesday, so.
Yeah, so that way we can include him.
You're in agreement that there should be 2 points of contact?
I think there should be three, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was saying that, Darren, excuse me for, I was referring to Doug and Tom, probably wouldn't hurt at all to have a supervisor there too.
Here's what I want to tell the group. Of all the things in our Justice Center that are going to be up functional, the jail, the attorney's office, dispatch getting over there is our #1 concern. It's the one thing that our architect is concerned about, our construction manager is concerned about, I'm concerned about, I think our board's concerned about it. I think we're a little bit behind on, what needs to happen over there. That where the antenna was gonna be, what's the big issue, and we have like 3 different locations, and that kind of set us back. But however we set this up, I just want Doug to know, and for Tom to know, and Joe to know that this dispatch thing, getting in and functional at the Justice Center is it should be a priority for everybody at this point. Anything we can do. I don't care if we have 2 contacts or 20 contacts or 1 contact. We all need to pull together and get this done. And it's a big concern because July 1st is coming fast. If that's when we're going
And that's one of the things that are coming up with the discussions, and we had a meeting with the Z-Tron today. What is the substantial date?
April 1st right now, but it's been dynamic, and it's been anywhere from April 15th to March 7th.
Because a lot of the decisions that we need to make are dependent on that, because there's a lot of stuff that we have to do that the architect did not include, that we have to do on our own.
This is outside the realm of your meeting. When we get together for our little structure meeting we're gonna have, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
We'll all sit down and bang that out. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there something we can do temporarily, Tracy? Like, can we pass a motion pending Aaron's, no?
No, I mean, we've been working together. That's not,
Okay.
we'll be wide and open. We just needed to have that somewhat formalized on.
Okay. We'll put it on the agenda for next Tuesday.
But you need to make sure you let Motorola know that they can talk to either of the 2.
Yep, and I'll do that tomorrow.
Excellent.
Thank you, Doug.
Is there any other items from the board?
Appreciate the discussion.
Oh, there was an email that I saw, involved Tom getting some kind of system or software.
Oh,
Yeah. I think as a board, we need to discuss that.
I think you're talking about the scheduling.
Scheduling work.
Yeah.
I called Joe about it.
Okay.
And I think I like the system enough, we're gonna try to use it for our deputies and jail staff as well. So I mean, truly, I think that probably should just default to a personnel thing with the sheriff.
Okay, so it's your budget and that's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if we're gonna use it for the other two divisions, you know, we can lump it in, it just makes sense.
Or why not we just pay half?
Well, I'll take whatever you guys wanna give me, but I'm just saying,
I think for just clarity's sake,
That makes it
listen,
simple.
if he wants to run with it, then
Yeah.
yes.
Then we can cover something else down the road.
Doug, you have
Yes.
a vote this time.
Yes. Which, like I said, he's.
Can I have the floor?
Yes, go ahead, Troy.
Good. Since the weekend, we had a little incident with a little tornado tear up the north side of the county. Y'all have a burn ban, and so there's been questions on the burn ban. So, kind of, since all the majority of the chiefs are here, you need to decide, do you want to wait a couple weeks, let it green up a little bit before you raise that burn ban? The other thing is, a lot of the trees that's been destroyed and piled up are green, so they're not gonna burn them anytime soon, so wait a little bit longer, whatever you guys decide.
Yeah.
I know-
Let's have a chiefs meeting after this here real fast, after the
Just
911.
just so you
Yeah.
know, that's what's going on behind the scenes, they're gonna ask and all the rules that you guys set for your local jurisdictions
You
and
just
stuff.
stick around and wait, then you know the answer.
That'd be good.
Is FEMA gonna, they usually kick in like tree chippers and things like that, don't they?
If it's a big enough incident right now, we haven't moved that far forward, you know how fast FEMA moves.
Yeah.
It's all like Volkswagen and first. So we need to kind of have our ducks in a row, and if they do come out with FEMA funds and that, and then they're gonna have what you can and can't do anyway. But it's your jurisdictions first, so I need to know as a county what you guys wanna do.
Let's have our chiefs meeting after this real fast, or department meeting. Is there any public input for the 911 board, or?
I just would like, if you guys are gonna have a chiefs meeting, do you want to settle the subcommittee vote tonight too? Would that be feasible?
I think we already did.
Well, we're gonna vote one paid, one volunteer.
Oh, for
yeah,
the,
we can do
yeah,
that.
let's do that.
Yep.
Yep, nope, let's do that.
Absolutely.
Any public input? Can I get a motion to adjourn? I guess second, whoever just seconded?
Rob?
All in favor? Thank you, everyone, this was a good meeting.
Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
What's that?